Art since 1945.
So American and Europe after 1945. So this is the map of the world after 1945, and this one will be the world after that. This is the world of the 20th century, which is it has a big difference to the 1945 world map and the 20th century. Next is the abstract expressionism. Because of World War II, the global art capital, Paris, shifted from Paris to New York City. So the designation abstract expressionism encompasses a wide variety of post-war American painting, usually characterized by large abstract painted canvases, also known as the New York School. The movement includes sculpture and other media as well. The term action painting is associated with abstract expressionism and describing a direct and highly dynamic kind of art that involves the spontaneous application of vigorous, sweeping brush strokes and the effects of dripping and spilling paint onto the canvas. Next, we have gestural abstraction and chromatic abstraction. This is the first major avant-garde art style to develop in the United States. So, gestural abstraction is the expressive application of paint leaving visible and often chaotic brushstrokes, while chromatic abstraction lacks the energetic application of paint but uses blocks and lines of color to express complex feelings about the universe, and also called the color field of painting. So there are two painters in gestural abstraction, which are Jackson Pollock and Willem D. Kooning, while chromatic also has two painters, which is Barnett Newman and Mark Rothko. So I mentioned before the avant-garde art. So what is avant-garde art style? In French, avant-garde means advance-garde and refers to innovative or experimental concepts, works, or the group of or people producing them, particularly in the realms of culture, politics, and the arts. That's why it is called avant-garde or garde art. So this is the artwork of Jackson Pollock. Existentialism. So this is artwork of Jackson Pollock. Existentialism. Hero is aware of the absurdities of life and realizes that all decisions are absurd and purposeless, ultimately choosing what to wear. We live in a meaningless world, so we create meaning where it doesn't exist through our individual activities. Think of Sisyphus. We must derive meaning only from ourselves. So this is his artwork by Jackson Pollock. Again, the name of this artwork is Lavender Mist on 1950. So he said no hidden messages or meanings or symbols, records of bodily movements and gestures only. So physical manifestation of feelings deep in the subconscious or jong. Conscious, unconscious, collective, unconscious, non-representation, and completely abstract figures appear in his work, express inner thoughts and emotions through visible brush and painter's knife strokes. Often reworked canvases or wiped off paint to start over, painted over another part. So sometimes worked a canvas through, made holes in it. So this is how he worked. This is how he managed to make his work. Next is Woman 1 since 1950 to 1952. Series of colossal female figures. This is the feminine features recognizable. Yes, that's true. Think Woman of Wellendorf. What makes a woman a woman? So based on advertising, this is based on advertising over emphasis of feminine features to appeal to men and women alike. This is just like a seductive art. Next is chromatic abstraction. This artwork is made by Barnett Newman, titled Ver Heroios Sublimis on 1950 to 1951. So Newman used color to express complex feelings about humanity and its relationship to the universe. Interest in the sublime, zips, stripes that run vertically through the canvas height. Background is usually only one color. So this is how he made this artwork, just only for one color, because chromatic abstraction is only for color. And the next painter is Mark Rothko. He painted this on number 19, 1961. So expression of feeling through the colors. This is how he expressed his feelings through painting with only a few colors. If you only observe the colors of the painting, you miss the deep religious experience he had while creating them. Life is a cycle of tragic times and happy times. Express the cycle through colors. Basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, and doom. So this is how they describe how he feel every day. Next is the post-painterly abstraction by Frank Stella, Mass or Menace, more or less on 1964. It is described by Clement Greenberg, an influential art critic, as the cool and rational. Used same techniques as ABX artists like Pollock, but did not put intentional subconscious expression into the paintings. Pinstripe paintings, canvases of solid colors separated by areas of bare canvas, or emphasizes the flatness and no sense of recessional space. The Bay. This art is entitled The Bay on 1963 by Helen Frankenthaler. Color-filled painting or the technique. Diluted oil paints with turpentine and watercolors with water, so the paint was very thin and could be poured very easily to raw and unprimed canvas. Colors soak in the material or creating a color stain or soak stain. Think juice soak. Evocative of landscape painting, very flat on no third dimension. This is how he described his painting. This is how he used his paint so that he could make such a beautiful artwork. So next is the Cubism by David Smith. QB 19 or 1964. So he said welded pieces of metal together in abstract compositions or influence of Cubist sculptures. Cubist in the 1960s. Basic geometric shapes, rectangles, squares, circles, triangles, and many more, welded together to make them appear to be precariously balancing. Stainless steel varnish or to give texture, praise for their evocation of human qualities, and resemble totem poles. This is how they made Cubism, which is very unartistic. Next is sculpture. An artwork is minimalism, a predominantly sculptural movement, and its emphasis on objecthood. Minimalism emphasizes the shapes and straight edges of their creations, no surface decoration, elements, figures, or other imaginary. Getting rid of the things that people used to think were essential to art, sought to remove any visible signs of themselves in their art. Personality of the artist is completely suppressed. Opposed to sculpture like Cubist, the relationship of parts to a whole, sought to create. This is Donald. Next is Donald Judd, and he made this series of boxes arranged in a vertical composition attached. Boxes with space in between the interplay between solids and voids, shadows and light. Interest in mechanical and precise forms. Next is the pop art on 1950s. A movement that emerged in the 1950s composed of British and American artists who draw inspiration from popular imaginary and imagery and products from popular and commercial culture. Opposed to elitist fine art, pop art reached its peak of activity in the 1960s, emphasizing the banal or sketchy elements of everyday life in such forms as mechanically reproduced silk screens, large-scale facsimiles, and soft sculptures. This is how the pop art. I know pop-up is very popular. Next is this Brillo box by Andy Warhol on 1968. The person that was marketed celebrity and 15 minutes of fame designed school newspaper ads for consumer goods, for example shoes, develop an art of comedies, objects that are both and. So this is how he made. And for the last, for the pop art, as an example is the Marilyn Ditch on 1962 by Andy Warhol again. So graphic arts techniques. Photographic transfer or silk screen. It is the method of using pre-made shapes. Allow for multiple copies of consumer items. So the studio name is the factory efficient place of production.
And now, we will tackle about the site-specific art. Site-specific art, it is an artwork only exists in a specific location, can only function in particular environment. Surrounded Islands by Christo and Jean Claude, Florida, 1982, pink fabric. Temporary works of art started with wrappings like motorcycles, etc. Extended into wrapping the environment. Essential to the work is that the art does not damage nature or the ecology, must be returned to the way it was found afterwards. Works not patronized. Later, the wrapping became curtains, NYC Central Park project. This wrapping was of 11 man-made islands of the coast of Miami in Biscayne Bay. Flamingo pink fabric, an appropriate choice. Concerned that the fabric might affect manatees, didn't. As you can see the image in the side, it is the surrounded islands, right? Surrounded islands. Next is by Robert Smithson, The Spiral GT on 1970 in Great Salt Lake, Utah. Earthworks, efforts to preserve nature, incorporating natural materials in outdoor locations. Site-specific works wanted to capture the beauty of Earth in the outdoor space. Some works done indoors, but involved taking materials from outside and inside, like dirt, rocks, sand, etc. Non-site works. It used mirrors in indoor works to create infinite feeling. The example photo below is the Spiral GT in 1970. Next is the low-level scanning. Search for inspiration in a specific site. Coil of rock going into the Great Salt Lake, remote and inaccessible area. Walking on the GT changes the participant's view, constantly curving and changing. GT, peer into the water, transform into a coil of rocks sitting silently in the vast wilderness. Similar to the North American earthworks, Serpent Mound, etc., became like a legend because of 1972 to the present. It is only visible in times of drought, submerged underwater. Next is by Richard Serra, Tilted Arc on 1981. Jacob K. Javits, Federal Plaza, New York City. In famous work of art, it is made of steel. Wanted a work of art to disrupt use of the site. The power of the piece should disrupt the site. Black views, people unable to cruise the plaza, etc. Artwork would dictate the way the site was used. Next is the anti-form art. The process is the actual art became objectionable when it began to disrupt use of the plaza, held trial over its place. Many wanted Sarah to move the work, but it is the site specific, it won't work anywhere else. Removed by the patron, General Services Administration. Artist filed countersuits but lost. Brings up issues of patronage and ownership of art. Who owns art? The artist or the patron? After art is sold, does the artist have a right to it? Legally? Aesthetically? No laws to safeguard an artist's work once it is sold. Next is we will tackle about the superrealism or photorealism. Superrealism or photorealism. Superrealism, still life paintings or portraits with photographic accuracy, often based on photographs. Employed airbrush and grid lines to create realistic images. As you can see the image below, it is an example of superrealism or photorealism. Next is Audrey Flack, Marilyn on 1977, oil over acrylic on canvas. It is influenced by Dutch Vanitas paintings, de Trompe-l'oeil. Marilyn was not always the superficial woman in the Warhol image. Norma Jean, elements in the painting tell of her early life. Symbols, fruit, life failed to show transience of life. Hourglass, saint. August calendar page, month when she died. Airbrush used to remove any traces of brush marks. Wanted it to seem like a photograph. Next is Chuck Close, Big Self-Portrait on 1967 to 1968, acrylic on canvas. It is large, realistic portraits of everyday people, often friends or himself, not formal portraits, informal snapshots. Intimate image. Tried to revive portraits. ABX had killed it. Technique. Use a grid over a photograph to capture the details. Airbrush used to remove traces of brush. 1988 to 1989 became paralyzed or quadriplegic. Can move his arms but in limited range. These are the example images. Next is Dwayne Hanson. Sculpture known for images of average American citizens, tourists, shoppers, not ridiculing humanity, celebrating their worst moments. Continues the tradition of trompe-l'oeil. Dwayne Hanson, supermarket shopper on 1970. Polyester resin and fiberglass polychromed in oil, with clothing, steel cart and groceries life-size. Life-size casts of bodies made for his sculptures, based on real people's bodies, also use real hair and clothing, often mistaken for real people in the museum. What was he trying to say about Americans? Large middle to upper class society that can afford travel, eat as much as they please, etc. Can't blend in gracefully with other. Next is we will tackle about the feminist art. Feminist art, it is an art that addresses issues of sexual discrimination and subjugation of women. Changed her last name to Chicago, where she was born, because she believed that women shouldn't live with a name given to them by patriarchy or subjugation. Installation, temporary work of art made up of assemblages created for a particular space like an art gallery or museum. As you can see the image above, it is by Judy Chicago, The Dinner Party on 1979, multimedia including ceramics and statuary. Next, alludes to 39 women that Chicago believes should be recognized. Originally supposed to be 13 women, number in a witch's coven present at the Last Supper. Inadequate number, so it was tripled. Large equilateral triangle table, 48-foot sides, triangle, Mother Goddess symbol, sacred feminine. Traditional women's art incorporated ceramics, embroidery, etc. Table settings specific to the women and meant to resemble female reproductive organs. Next is Barbara Kruger, entitled Your Gaze Hits the Side of My Face, on 1981. Photography with red frame. First hints at postmodernism. Modernism is old and outdated by the 80s. Artists could try to revolutionize, but that is traditional at this point in history. The idea of doing something new has become old-fashioned. Decay is the appropriation of ideas from the past, but implied of their past meaning. Reverse modernism implode it, deconstructing implosion, destruction from within, using conventions of art against itself. Next is graphic designer. Mass media influence attempts to deconstruct advertisements, words placed in as design elements, large single image with a short, catchy phrase like a magazine ad, appropriates the images from elsewhere and adds the text. Using the text to interpolate the viewer, insert audience into work, uses ambiguous pronoun address, example, you, who is you? Done so many can identify with the work, can also be used to indicate the target audience, seem to address a male audience usually. Comment upon the male gaze again, women do not see themselves. They only see themselves through the heterosexual male gaze. Next is by Cindy Sherman, entitled Film Still Number 35 on 1979 Gelatin Silver Print. It imitates the way that images of women have been stereotypically depicted into the movies. Deconstruct the images, 1950s poster outside theater with black and white photographs from the film, entices the viewer to see the movie. Not always from the film itself, work with the idea of stereotypes, can identify the protagonist, antagonist of the film, etc. As you can see the image above, she put herself into the photographs. Dressed in costumes, character portrait, not really who she is. The photos imply that there is a narrative, but none exists. She always looks away from the camera, implies that someone else is in the scene. Explores cliches of the 50s, women, businesswomen, unmarried or widowed. Criticizes the concept of women as objects to be gazed at. Also did a rape series, shows herself victimized, historical portrait series, dressed up like a Marie Antoinette and others, and pornography series, use prosthetic limbs, begs the questions, if there is no real body, is it porn? Lastly, is the advantages of being a woman artist. First, working without the pressure of success. Next, not having to be in shows with men. Next, having an escape from the art world in your 4 freelance jobs. Next, knowing your career might pick up after your 80. Next, being reassured that whatever kind of art you make, it will be labeled feminine. Next, not being stuck in a tenured teaching position. Next, seeing your ideas live on in the work of others. Next, having the opportunity to choose between career and motherhood. Next, not having to choke on those big cigars on paint in Italian suits. Next, having more time to work when your mate dumps you for someone younger. Next, being included in revised versions of art history. Next, not having to undergo the embarrassment of being called a genius. Lastly, getting your picture in the art magazines wearing a gorilla suit. So that would be all in art since 1945. Hope you learned about our presentation. Thank you for listening and watching. God bless.
Peace.